A class that's structure-rich is not authoritarian. A lot of people might think a class looks structure-rich because there is somebody just minding the store, and because there's just compliance, and because there's silent desk work going on. That's not what I mean by structure-rich. What I mean is that you have designed a process of pedagogy which allows young people to be systematically curious in ways that increase the level of their learning and which add a level of difficulty. And that's part of the design. That's not the same as saying, tell me more about. I'll give you an example of what I would mean by that. I have given a lot of people projects. I'm thinking particularly of the boys that I taught in the boys' school I was in, year 8, 9, 10 boys, where I gave them a character for the semester. And this is in history, I gave them a character. Now, when I gave them a character, the first thing I did, where they had to be expert in that character for the semester, or even indeed the year, when I gave them a character, the first thing I was aware of is that I wanted to give high status characters to low status kids. So part of my structure, Rich, was to make sure that I didn't just say, who would you like to do? But for year 10 boys, high status characters in history would be Adolf Hitler, Stalin, Goering, Goebbels, Hess, Himmler, any Nazi will do. They had to get under the skin of that character. Now, what we could do, if it was structure poor, I could say to them, go to the library and find out everything you can about Winston Churchill. Now, that's one thing that could happen, or Henry Ford, or whoever it was. The point for me was to ensure that we begin with something where it's not too demanding, where they can go and Google, presumably. They can go and say, well, the facts where he was born then and so forth. So we start, fairly much the basis of those easy tasks. And I actually did this with boys on the very first day I had them. I gave them an allocation and I gave it to them. I didn't say, which one would you like to do? So the first thing I did was I knew why I was giving certain kids. And I was giving someone like Karl Marx, I would not give to a kid who was struggling in literacy. Because I would actually be stretching some of the higher kids with that. And I would want them to be able to get their head around the work of Karl Marx or Lenin. Indeed, one of the students I gave Lenin to, I met him years later. He'd become a barrister now. He's a barrister. And he'd gone to Oxford to study international law. And he said it was that bloody Lenin. He said, because he read almost everything that Lenin wrote then. And he read Iskra, the Spark. He went back all the copies of that revolutionary magazine to see what Lenin had written in it. And he just got into this. And then he got Leninist, and then he got anti-Lenin. He went through all these times himself. Now, when he sat up on a panel, and this is where the structure came in, from just saying where was Lenin born, what was his name before that, what did his parents do, what did he do when he went to Vienna, yes, we know all that, and he was in exile, yes, and he came back during the, yes. But questions around that were more complex and more difficult, that as they went on, I wanted that to open up. So when I put Karl Marx on a panel with Henry Ford and with Joseph Stalin, now we're saying, do you believe in God? What's your notion of God? What do you think is the value of money? And what you start to do is you're looking at higher order questions. Now, they're not the sort of things I would be building at the beginning because it was very biographical, but as we go on, they had to take their place in panels with others first. All the Nazis could get together, but after a while, one Nazi would have to take on somebody else. So we start to develop a pedagogy, which means that they're going to have to do higher and higher order thinking. And so across the expanse of time, whether it's a semester or a year, the bar is going up. The bar is going up because I'm asking the more complex questions. So as we got to those things, the panels were actually really exciting, and it was quite interesting to hear. And some kids struggled. What did Henry Ford think? Well, some of the questions around ideology might not have been something that he said anything about, and we had to admit that there are times when there's no information. For example, what Rudolf Hess thought about blah. But nevertheless, even if they could say, I have nothing to say on that matter, the question of whether they really did have something to say about it or not was a question for my evaluation, and we would do that. There's also a student panel who are asking questions, and that we begin to build that in. So structure-rich now starts to involve the students in peer-to-peer as well, because they start to think of questions that they think ought to be asked of those panels, and that they think that there should be some sort of discussion and debate there. So structure-rich pedagogy, I think, is very important when you have a very large project.